Welcome to In the Black. I'm your host, Sterling McKinley. Our podcast celebrates successful entrepreneurs here in the DMV. We share their inspiring true stories, provide you insights and tips on building a profitable business that stays in the black. Today, I'm speaking with Rhett E. Butler, an accomplished professional, renowned for his experience in brand strategy, marketing communications, event management, and combat sports. Rhett, welcome to In the Black.
Oh my God, it feels so good to be black on In the Black. Sterling McKinley, man, I love this. And I love the alliteration for In the Black as well. Yeah,
Yes.
we are not in the red. Thank you, sir.
Exactly. Great. Well, let's first start off. Let's break down multi-hyphenate. You do so many things. I'll let you explain. So explain to me how to keep everything going, how to keep all those balances going, and how do you find a work-life balance with doing so many different things?
Oh my God, such a great question. And so many layers to it. Sterling,
Yes.
first and foremost, thank you, number one, for having me on the show. I really appreciate you reaching out to me. And it was a pleasure meeting you and now having a relationship with you. In relation to myself, Sterling, I've never felt normal. I've never felt like someone that just needed to follow one path. And more than anything, I didn't understand the word associated for people like this because when you wear multiple hats across multiple industries, you have to also understand multiple cultures and languages
Right.
and industry speak. And what I realized later, and I'm going to credit Tupac Shakur for this, is that's called a chameleon. That's called a
Right.
chameleon. I'm a person that can just change their colors to match any environment. But at the time, what it sounded like to my mother and others that love me was unfocused. So what I realized pretty early was that I'm really good writing and I'm a storyteller.
Okay.
I only knew that because in high school, guys would ask me to write love letters for their girlfriends, and all of a sudden they weren't breaking up anymore.
Right.
And once I realized that I had a flair with words that kind of persuaded or guided people down a certain path,
Okay.
it took many years to realize that this is a form of branding. So
Right.
the first thing I did was jump into the media business because I knew how to write, and I'm a self-professed media nerd. I was the kid at a young age watching Tony Brown's Journal, watching Tim Russert and Meet the Press. I just loved this stuff. I thought it was really cool. I loved the print. I loved magazines when magazines were a thing. So I went to Howard University as a broadcast journalism major, figuring I could
Right.
write for the school newspaper. Amid all of that, I had multiple verticals and internships. And what I realized pretty quickly was that TV and print journalism were extremely different vehicles. Print lasts forever, although visual lasts forever. It felt way too fleeting in the process of
Right.
creating it for me.
Mhm.
So from that, I said, well, I understand how to make things on video and through written,
Right.
but what else can I do with this, right? Because number one, once I graduated school, the cell phone and the tablet started obliterating the media business.
Right.
So my entire trajectory, and I had really good internships, Sterling. My internships in college were at Time Magazine, New York City, where I'm from originally, and
Right.
also back in DC, I worked at Time Magazine, DC bureau, interviewing politicians and such. They said I would never get any bylines as an intern. I got 3. I mean, just at the end of the day, that was where I thought I was headed. And my first job out of
Right.
college was at Money Magazine.
Mhm.
But literally last hired, first fired because advertising started disintegrating in the business
Right.
because of phones. So I had to start pivoting. Well, while at Howard, of course, like most people, I had this thought, going to Howard, of being a party promoter, an entertainment person, or whatever. And while doing that at school, I started to develop a reputation for putting people together, making events happen, facilitating things. And that kind of
Right.
bled into post-college when I was let go at Money Magazine. A mentor that also ran the arena on campus said, I need someone to help me advance events. And I remember you as a student. Well, one of the first events I did was Mike Tyson versus Kevin McBride fight, which was at the then MCI Center in downtown DC.
Oh,
And I met a gentleman who had the facilitation contract for that promoter, and I had to advance everything for him on behalf of the school for the facilities. But he said to me, I really like you. I'll stay in touch. Well, I wound up quitting that job. As a writer, I learned how to write business plans and started having people pay me to write business plans. And I was literally doing them in Love Cafe on 14th Street in
Right.
RIP to Love Cafe. But while I was doing that, that gentleman did actually call me back and said, well, you know what, Rhett, I also do the UFC. And
Okay.
let me give you a shot. So I flew out to LA, did a fight, UFC 60 at the Staples Center, Matt Hughes versus Hoist Gracie.
Okay.
And it changed my life. Not only did I realize that it wasn't although it was anxiety filled, I wasn't afraid to be around people that can literally beat the crap out of me. But what I realized was the humanity of these guys, and
Mhm.
mixed with me being from an urban environment of New York City,
Right.
transplanted to DC, but having diplomacy mixed with a little street smarts worked really
Okay.
well in an aggressive business like combat
Right.
sports.
Mhm.
That allowed me to not only stay with the UFC for 7 years and go all around the world and advance and help create
Wow.
crews in different countries,
Okay.
but other promoters that would come around the ecosystem of fighting would notice me and ask me, could I help them?
Right.
And once I started reaching out, or getting reached out to, I should say, by, basically rich people that do combat sports as a consortium of investors, I
Right.
started realizing that what I learned on the highest level, because I started out at the top at the UFC level, was that there's a lot of people out here with money, that there's a lot of broadcasters looking for content like this, and that if I focus on being a service provider specialized in this industry, whether it's boxing or MMA, I would have a whole other trajectory, totally disassociated from media, from what I realized later would be branding, the art of storytelling, the art of creating
Mhm.
perception. And now I've been able to honestly just operate each tentacle of things that I understand as their own brands and find their own clients subsequent to each brand that I have.
Right. That's amazing. I mean, how old are you? You have us living a million lives already.
I'm gonna
So
give it
with
away, man.
combat
I'm
sports.
40. I'm 44, man. I'm 44.
Okay. All right. Let's good. Let's good. So combat sports. Were there any inkling to get into the ring and, and try your hand at the sport, or are you more of an observer and a manager?
Yeah, I'm definitely a lover, not a fighter. I will fight for my family and friends, of course, and for
Right.
what I believe in. But I will say this, Sterling, as a person that grew up really with a lot of great male mentors,
Oh,
of course, my father being the start, my uncles, and then just in general professional mentors that happen to
right.
be successful Black men, we always communed around boxing matches. Like when I
Yeah.
was young,
That's true.
we used to just, this is Tyson times and everything. We used to sit
Yeah.
down, they would sneak me a beer. I got a chance to listen to the men and talk with men. And, these guys were all responsible, had jobs, came home. I don't really, respectfully, and I understand there's a huge narrative in our culture about only the parts of our culture that are sometimes, unfortunately because of circumstances where people don't have fathers in the home. And that is what it is.
Right.
Clearly, I know all about that with my friends and such. But I was one of these guys fortunate enough to just have a lot of strong Black men
Right.
with good jobs or just
Mhm.
providers that came home, and when it was time to relax, they brought me along, and it was normally around a boxing match. So
Okay.
what I'll say is I've always loved boxing, had no
Right.
idea I would be able to get into that business. And in relation to fighting, I've trained,
Okay.
but I did, shout out to Sean Porter, that's my guy, Showtime Sean. He one time had me, Charlemagne the God, Nestor Gibbs from the Boxing Voice, and Barack Best from the Boxing Bully.
Right.
We did some sparring with him one time at Gleason's gym in Brooklyn. Sean gave me
Okay.
one good punch to the solar plexus. I will never
Yeah.
try to do that again.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. I train for
Right.
fitness, but for cash flow, yeah, I'm a
Right.
pass.
Right. Okay. Great. So you bring up MMA and boxing. You know I'm going with that. So Jake Paul Tyson. What's your prediction? What's gonna happen?
Yeah. So, and to be clear, I'm also part of the Boxing Writers Association of America. I
Oh,
have
okay.
one Hall of
Awesome.
Fame vote. So I'm 100% all the way in the game. There's not a lot of people of color in there, so I'm very proud of this.
Right.
First of all, I've worked Jake Paul fights.
Mhm.
I know his team. What I'll say first is I was a non-believer in Jake Paul, and then I
Right.
worked Jake Paul versus Anderson Silva in Glendale, Arizona. And what I noticed is a guy that's very driven, very committed to the
Okay.
art of boxing, to being an athlete. By the way, being a boxer is like the least fun thing I could think of. It's nothing but
Mhm.
physical torture before you get to the fight. But to answer your question specifically, what I believe is that Jake Paul will feel what he's never felt before in relation to body shots. I think Mike Tyson's going to eat his ribs up. I think Jake
Mhm.
Paul understands jabbing, but I don't think he's ever seen a guy come at him like this while still pivoting
Right.
and hitting his ribs. And I think if we all remember when Jake Paul was on the undercard of Mike Tyson fighting Roy Jones,
Mhm.
we saw Mike Tyson do something that we didn't think he was still physically able to do.
Right.
Jake Paul is not yet 30 years old. Make no mistake,
Right.
I do not believe Mike Tyson will beat Jake Paul. What I do believe is that Mike Tyson will teach Jake Paul what old school boxing looks like,
Right.
what pain feels like on a real level. And I think that it's going to be something that allows Mike to still feel youthful, showcase what he
Right.
thinks is probably one of his best assets, which is his
Mhm.
fighting. But 100% Jake Paul, I think, is going to win by decision. But I think for what it is, for this new age, it's a great novelty. I'm not mad at it. It is what it is.
Okay, awesome. So the next transition, so combat sports to gelato. How does that
Oh man.
how does that happen? How does that work?
Yes. So I've lived in Las Vegas for 7 years before I moved back to the DMV. And it was mainly because I worked for the UFC. And then I started a company called Fight Services, which is my combat sport brand for people that want me to run their fights, facilitate the fighting event. So I'm lactose intolerant. I'm extremely dairy based. Like I hate
Okay.
dairy products. I used to love it all, but it doesn't love me. I don't even think I knew what was happening to my body. Somebody
Mhm.
told one time, one of my friends' moms was like, I think you're always having these issues with your stomach because you're lactose intolerant. You love cheese. I'm like, oh. When I realized this, I said, okay, well, what are the other options out here with non-dairy? And I love dessert. So when the things I tasted in the store, Sterling, I just felt like the flavor didn't pop. What you don't want as a person with any kind of allergy is to eat
Right.
something that reminds you have an allergy.
Right.
Like I want to feel like a normal person, even with this allergy. And what I felt was that every time I went and got a pint of non-dairy ice cream, I knew I was lactose intolerant.
Yeah.
And that annoyed me more than anything. So
Right.
when I lived in Vegas, anybody who knows Vegas, especially in the summer, it is sweltering hot. I am from the East Coast. Dry heat, I like it better than humidity, like in Florida, where I've also lived. But it was so hot, I didn't have to go outside. If there was no fight week, I'm in the house.
Mhm.
So
Right.
I used to watch a lot of Food Network, right? I got a lot of idle
Okay.
time. My whole family's back on the East Coast. I'm out here. So I watched Food Network. And then one day I said, you know what? I want to get a gelato machine. I
Right.
don't know why. I think I was just watching Chopped mad times. And then I bought the gelato machine and I made something. And the young lady I was with at the time was like, yo, this is really good.
Right.
Made something else, gave it to her mom. This is amazing. Gave it to more friends on the West Coast. This is amazing. Came back to the East Coast. I started selling it or giving it away, I should say, to friends here. Make a long story short, one of my friends has a juice bar, said, why don't you bring some here and let me sell it? So I
Right.
put some in there and it was selling out every time. Fast forward, pandemic came because I said, well, this was just fun, like some playful thing. Pandemic came and I said, you know what? Maybe I should think about this a little more seriously because I was receiving too many compliments and people were always saying, I hope you're not going to give up on that. And I was like, well,
Mhm.
it was never really a goal to begin with.
Right.
But I did recognize that I felt like I met the grade of flavor that I was seeking. And I felt that other people were giving me that same energy when they said, I would have never known this was non-dairy.
Right.
Pandemic came, gave me some time to think, really formulate a game plan. Fast forward, I started doing more pop-ups. And fast forward to today where I was able to receive investment, capital, and now we're full throttle with a full line of pints, 6-ounce cups, and we'll be in 5 grocery stores in DC starting next week, as well as Uber Eats
Congrats.
platform.
That's
Thank you, man. I
amazing.
appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with what you said about, you can taste something and tell it's, because you have an allergy. My son is allergic to nuts, to everything. And I try stuff sometimes. I'm like, man, this is terrible. You can taste it. You got the taste.
Facts.
Everything. So, that's great. So,
We got to get your son some Jolie Gelato. It's nut-free, by the way.
yes. Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. So also
Absolutely.
you're the co-founder of Shine Fighting Promotions, which is
Oh,
the first
man.
African-American owned MMA promotion on pay-per-view. It's a huge accomplishment. So tell me about that
Thank
and
you.
what challenges you face being the first African-American to do that.
Sterling, man, you do your research. I really appreciate you saying that. Thank you. Shout out to Dorian Price. Shout out to Devin Price. Shout out to Ron Foster. Dorian Price was on Ultimate Fighter season 3 or 4. He's
Okay.
from Baltimore, Maryland. He went to Hampton University. And when he went to Hampton, he always wanted to be a fighter. I don't know what it was about Dorian, but he
Right.
always wanted to fight. He started taking classes about kickboxing, jiu-jitsu, and then he made it all the way to the UFC. But Dorian, one of my good friends, thought when he got to the UFC, the highest level, Dana White, Joe Rogan, all of this, he actually felt like it was fake. Dorian's entire mentality was, I want to be the real life Jim Kelly. I want to
Okay.
go to the jungle. I want to fight killers and I want to have the realest experience.
Right.
So
Right.
amid me working at the UFC as a contractor again as Fight Services, I met Dorian and we became friends. And when he left the UFC, he moved to Thailand and became a kickboxing legend in Thailand.
Oh, wow.
Did everything he said he was going to do,
Mhm.
100%. I got to send you some of his clips. He got a crazy double knockout. That's amazing.
Right.
But Dorian, once his kickboxing career started dwindling down, said, Rhett, I see how you run the back of house for the UFC. I feel like we could do this on our own. And when he said that, I said, yeah, but of course, as with anything, fights cost a lot of money. And a fight is not an investment that you can look at as like a party and say, I did a party, we made our money back from the bar. No, a fight is one of those things where because of the amount of expenses, you're probably looking at a 3-fight run before you get a return. And that's only if you have a great TV deal, because what people don't realize is that promoters that create fights are are licensing the feed to a broadcast network for a fee. And that's how they offset a lot of the costs. At any rate, Dorian said, my brother's in finance. His name is Devin Price. And we have a kick-ass team that has put together some investment capital and we can do something. And Dorian came up with the name Shine Fight Promotions, like get your shine on, you can shine.
Right.
Some of the challenges. Number one, let me be very clear, Sterling. The mixed martial arts business, when I started and still to this day, is steeped in rural white culture. I want to be very clear. And I say that for a reason. Although, yes, the Gracie family created Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and they spread that gospel from Brazil all across Southern California, all across the Midwest. The reality is, when you looked at early MMA, and I'm talking during the Dana White era, not before that, you would still hear more of a rock and roll, hard rock edge in terms of the promos. It would still be more based around, crowds for white men. And when I started working the fights, I noticed that the crowd complexion started changing by arenas that we went to over time as stars of color were created. But before then, let's make no mistake, the main fan base was in Iowa, Wisconsin, Nebraska, these kind of places. So, and a lot of it is because to be in MMA, you have to have a strong wrestling base. You don't necessarily have to have hands, but if you know how to sprawl, if you know how to grapple, you can neutralize a person that has a heavy hand, right?
Right.
So one of the challenges we faced was, at first, we wanted people to focus on the fight card, and the fight cards were awesome. We would get ex-UFC fighters, things of that nature. Unfortunately, on the chat rooms and the blogs, once people realized that the ownership was completely black, four black guys, 2 of them brothers, and the fact that our company name was Shine Fight Promotions, we started seeing on the chat rooms people saying, why would you call your company Shine? That sounds like reverse racism, as if, people call blacks shines.
Oh, wow.
That was deeply hurting for us, it was deeply troubling, because Dorian is the only person I know that said, I would rather leave the UFC and go fight in a place where I might not get paid the same, but it feels more authentic for me. I thought that was the quintessential fight mentality. This guy's like a real life Jean-Claude Van Damme kickboxer. Right. And then additionally, I've been in the fight business on the highest levels. So me facilitating back of house, facilitating operations, you're getting it from a person that's seen it from the best. Devin is a money guy. Him and his family are well entrenched into healthcare and finance. Okay. And then Ron Foster, a former fighter, was our matchmaker. He knows every gym owner and trainer in the country. So we literally had a brain trust that was gangbusters. But when people realized we were black, we were paying all our bills on time, and that we were doing everything right, I don't know. I think because they had never seen it at that time, we just felt really unappreciated by everybody outside of the folks that we were hiring. And all I can say is I'm proud of us for doing something new and unique in that business. But it definitely taught me that there are certain uphill battles that I don't think I'm equipped to fight by myself. Right. And I definitely got a reality check walking into something a lot younger, really optimistic, and just couldn't believe that we pulled these things off with the amount of budgets that we were able to raise.
Right. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear it ended that way. It's crazy. You think if you have a good product, people will come, but still there can be a whole lot of challenges. So that's tough. So on that same note, personal thing, I always wondered this about the athlete, the UFC fighter, MMA. Is it lucrative? Do they make a good living, or is it something where they still have to have a day job and fight? What does that look like for them?
Oh, that's a great question. It depends on where you're at in your career, but I would say typically if you are an MMA fighter, what they do in MMA is they give you two kinds of bonus amounts, right? So first is you get what's called show money, meaning let's just say, for instance, $10,000 to show up. Now, if you win the fight, based on who you are, your record, they might say, okay, here's another 10,000 because you won. But if you didn't win, all you made was 10,000 to show up. Now that's at like the basic level. You might be 2-1, right? 3-1 or something like that. 3-0, 4-0. As you grow and you have a good manager, you get good fights, your manager understands how to pick really good fights for you.
Right.
And let's say you have great performances, i.e. it's almost like a demo for an artist where you have a great visual product to show people, look, I've knocked out these people in these ways, and this is going to sell you some tickets. Then you start to advance. But the reality is MMA pays extremely different than boxing. Yes, they are on the lower ends of the spectrum pay-wise, especially on some instances, women that fight mixed martial arts.
Right.
Ronda Rousey, shout out to Ronda, that's the homie. She kind of broke the glass ceiling for women in terms of the pay grade. But still, on many levels, it's not there. And one thing I'll say about Jake Paul, to give him respect, he's been very much on the case of keeping Dana White honest about pay scale and stepping up the money. And he pays his own boxers very well. So yeah, MMA, you're not going to get paid the greatest. Now, as you're doing what you're supposed to do and getting these certain wins, yes, you will get paid extremely well on certain instances. But let's not forget Francis Ngannou. Francis Ngannou left the UFC at the height of his career as the heavyweight champion because he felt like he was in a stifling contract that wouldn't allow him to also box, even though they let Conor McGregor box Floyd. And he also felt like he was never going to scale financially being under the UFC because the UFC makes stars and they leverage their star-making ability against your ability to make money. So they say, do you want to get rich and be not known, or do you want to be famous and we'll graduate you to rich? And that's what people have to decide when they get with the UFC.
Okay. Good to know before I make my entry. So let me ask you this. Growing up in New York, I know New York is a very, very, very impressionable things that happen to you there. Good things.
Absolutely.
So can you share some of the early influences that shaped your personality, your determination, and also what prompted you to move back to the DMV or move to?
Oh man, great questions. Number one, I'm from Harlem in the Bronx, uptown. What's goody? We outside. First and foremost, I'm born and raised in Harlem. There's nothing more pronounced within my psyche than Harlem, New York. Right. Harlem gives you style. Harlem gives you confidence. Harlem lets you know what's possible. Harlem creates its own slang. Yes, it can be a little overdone. Listen, I'm one of these New Yorkers. I'm not the super New Yorker. I actually am hypercritical of a lot of my brethren from New York for being extra New York. But at the same time, I will say that one thing I love about New York is that it taught me that you have to work really hard for everything. The world can be extremely competitive, and New York is a microcosm of competitiveness on an uber level. You're competing for space on the bus, the subway. You're competing for the next slice of pizza from the guy in front of you. I mean, it's literally that, and you feel that. True. Additionally, everybody lauds the famous folks from New York, but as a kid growing up in New York City, it was really stifling to know that these people and these things are so close within reach, but also so far to touch.
So far, yeah.
Oh my God. And I will say that it wasn't until I left New York and went to Howard University, I'll even go back and say it wasn't until I went on my first college tour that I realized the breadth of life and culture outside of the 5 boroughs. And I want to say that explicitly because even when I go back home, there's a lot of folks that are so complacent with just being from one of the 5 boroughs that they don't understand life actually happens when you leave this bubble. New York also can be very stifling for people because New York sometimes can have a ceiling for you. And it's really hard to break through a place that overcrowded. So going to Howard University, I felt like, although New York made me, I felt like DC raised me. And Howard University, the DMV area, the Blackness, the culture, the Afrocentrism, the health focus, the fact that I could go to a vegan soul food restaurant, in any direction I look, there's one. I could throw a stone and it touches a vegan soul food provider. I had never seen this, and I'm from Harlem. But it was just so Black. I think the fact that, we at the time we only had one Black mayor, David Dinkins. Now, obviously, we have Eric Adams in New York City. But DC has never had a white mayor. That blew my mind. I couldn't believe it. All leadership, the city council and such. Then I started finding out about Prince George's County. And then once I started realizing these things, it just really touched my soul. I'll just be quite honest. And as my journey took me to other places in the country, I've lived in Los Angeles, I've lived in Las Vegas, I've lived in Miami, I've lived a little bit in Denver. What I realized was nothing felt like DMV for me. And a lot of times, I will say I admittedly chased the sun for a while when I went from Vegas to Florida. So I was kind of like, I'm trying to just be in hot places with palm trees, but I never felt at home. And then at some point, when you go back to your natural home, for me, New York, that still I felt a bit removed again because now I had gotten used to number one, space in the DMV, and I had gotten used to the culture of the DMV, which felt more familiar to me even than back home. So for me, it was a no-brainer at some point to come back. I wanted to get out of my system living in places that I had dreamed about. I did that. I was able to live these places, do great things. But the DMV, Prince George's County, DC, that's home for me. I love it. There's so many great opportunities here and natural beauty that for me, this is going to always be a place that I'm at, regardless of me having secondary homes or anything.
Right. Okay. Awesome. So you mentioned that you went to Harvard University. I
Yep.
went to Morgan State. So
My man.
no competition.
Go Bears, go Bears.
But
Absolutely.
what makes the Howard experience different, and how did that set you up to be more prosperous and more multifaceted in your career?
Yeah, Howard University gives you a chip on your shoulder for sure.
Right.
They try to breed this within you. I think the fact that for me, hearing, and I hate to say this because I'm not one of these people that really gives a lot of credit to celebrity worship, and we can get into all of that because for me, part of that is just branding and people's ability to be swayed by perception. But again, I think as a younger person, hearing these names associated with Howard, it definitely was intriguing to start. And then when I actually went to the school for a college tour, I think the first thing that got me, Sterling, was there's a lot of girls here.
Right.
I'm be honest, I was just like, this is crazy. Everybody has a different accent, they're from a different place.
Right.
And that was probably the start of it. And then after that, when I delved into the curriculum and the opportunities, I was like, you know what, this place is amazing. And then more than that, when I applied and I did get in, I was actually the only one of my friends that got in. And and that was a little disheartening for me because I was like, wow, But what Howard does is it creates a familial situation that will last well beyond graduation. Right. Everywhere I go, somebody's saying HU, Of course, homecoming is live, and we get a lot of props for our homecomings, although I think it fell off, to be quite honest, because I remember when it was crazy. But at the same time, what Howard does is they don't give you anything for free. You're going to have to work for it all. You learn how to be a whole total adult. And you also understand that even though these people are going to give you a little more love, they're conditioning you and preparing you for what happens when you leave this cocoon. So I really appreciate Howard for doing that. And it definitely taught me to take nothing for granted and to appreciate all the uncles and aunties in administration I met along the way.
Looking back, what accomplishment are you the most proud of? And professionally, what was the greatest hurdle that you overcame?
Absolutely. I know you can relate. My greatest accomplishment is my son, Stone Butler. I love you, Stone. That's my guy. But professionally, my greatest accomplishment, Sterling, is the fact that I get to hire and pay my friends. That's the greatest thing I've ever done, because at the end of the day, Sterling, what I've realized is, I love being Black and I love the Black cultural experience, diasporatic experience. But the one thing I love more than anything is that I feel like I've been able to really find and identify my tribe. That's not in relation to skin color, although it's very convenient when those people in my tribe are my skin color. But what I'll say is that God, the ancestors, have brought to me really good people that I've been able to show up and show out for them, not make it about me. Although a lot of times I'm platformed, like how we met, moderating and you being the guest. But I've been able to allow my verticals to impact their lives positively.
Right.
And the fact that I'm able to create multiple opportunities. I'm sitting now in my studio, RBACM studio, extension of our Butler and Associates consulting brand. We have Jolie Gelato. Each of these entities has a person that has a financial commitment that I owe, that they're living their life based on me. I might not be paying them gangbuster salary, but it's definitely enough for them to live a comfortable lifestyle. And the fact is that more than anything was the only goal. It's to create, attract, and retain good people, create my own ecosystem, and incubate my great with my tribe. I'm not one of these people that looks at life and thinks about other people's success stories and tries to emulate. I never wanted to be famous. I never wanted to be white famous. And I say that because there's a certain level of fame you can have amongst the people who you take care of. And then there's fame that you covet because the world recognizes you for things that look akin to people that are famous marketed wise, right? And I try to make sure I differentiate what those things are, because if you get caught up in ego, if you get caught up in self-aggrandizement, you're missing the entire journey. The journey was to make other people's lives better, not just your own. Professional hurdle, the biggest hurdle I think I've had to overcome, well, there's two. One would, I'm gonna say Jolie Gelato, because outside of creating something on my own in the kitchen one day, Sterling, I actually had to go to class for this, learn some new information, invest a lot of money and time into learning how to be a food entrepreneur. I've never been in the food industries. So this was a totally new learning curve for me. I've always been consultant or an events based or media. But the second hurdle, which is probably primary, would be the fight business. You know, just like any other industry that's a little elusive, nobody really knows how to get in the fight game, right? Like it's like a it's almost like like, how do you do this? So
Right.
the fact that I met someone, they took me on a journey, I was able to carve out my own thing, and more than anything, survive a cutthroat business. Let's be very clear, Sterling. There are nefarious creatures in the fight business, 100%. Everybody's going to think, of course, first and foremost, Don King. We all know those stories, but there's so many other names you don't know and people don't know that I've had to deal with. So I say this to say, tenacity is what I learned, understanding diplomacy, even when you don't like what you're hearing, and understanding that it's not about always me making a point until it is about making a point. Sometimes it's about persevering for those that are with me, but just making sure people understand there's a level of disrespect we will not take. And then facing your fears when you're in front of big people that are professionally trained to do harm, and you have to tell them what to do, could be a little challenging.
Right.
I haven't had that challenge for a couple of years now, so I feel really blessed that I actually get the respect that I feel like I've earned to tell these individuals what to do, and they actually listen.
Great. You serve on a number of boards in various roles.
Yeah.
So what motivates you to give back to the community? And how do you choose the organizations that you want to support and work with?
No, I appreciate it. You know, interestingly, Sterling, I knew nothing about boards. I knew nothing about nonprofits.
Okay.
And over time, my work ethic and I think my character has led people to me that offered me
Right.
positions on boards. And once I got on those boards and I realized what it means to serve, it just feels really enriching, right? Again, one through line you'll see with me is that I don't make it about me. I make it about everybody with me. People might not see these people, although I try to platform them as much as I can. But at the end of the day, helping folks that I might never meet through these organizations is enriching. I'm with the Maryland Black Chamber of Commerce, Prince George's Regional Chapter Board, We Care DMV, formerly United Cerebral Palsy. I used to be on the National Concierge Association. Shout out to them and their board. I actually just had to resign just because Jolie's kicking up a little hard. But at the end of the day, it's been really, really enriching, man, to work with this many people for altruistic reasons. And I'm just blessed, again, that folks look at me as an asset to help others.
Right.
It's just really been an amazing experience just to be asked these things.
Finally, what long-term goals do you have? What projects do you working on that may be coming up? I know you said your gelato is going to be released in stores, I believe, next week. But what other
Yeah.
things you have coming up and what things are you working on?
Thank you so much, man. Jolie Gelato, we're looking to scale nationwide. We obviously want to eventually go franchisable at some point in our future.
Right.
Right now, we're just navigating this game, and we're also realizing that scaling takes time, and we're not going to put the pressure on ourselves to go too fast, too soon. Long term, you know, I'm a writer, so that means naturally I want to get into other print mediums such as script writing. You met me at the Prince George's Film Festival, so being around this many amazing filmmakers has only stoked my embers to want to write a film, write a script, and luckily I've had the opportunity to start on that as well, and it's kind of loosely based on some of my storyline. Beyond that, Sterling, I think everything with me is always about creation of opportunity, incubating our great, and watching all the things I've already created mature into places and spaces I couldn't even imagine. I have no idea what my son wants to do with his life. He told me he wants to be a video editor. Daddy has a studio. We'll see where he goes with it, right? But at least in the early parts, he gets to see daddy doing anything and everything he loves. And more than anything, my son is my legacy. I know you can relate. So I think I wrap everything around my last name, not my first name. So what people could look forward is the coming of Stone Butler, Rhett #2, and him taking it in places that I couldn't even go because he's seen this whole journey. I've held nothing back from my son. He's been in arenas, cages, ice cream shops. He knows he just thinks his daddy's cool, but very random. And I just like watching whatever that's going to make. And remember, and I think you can relate, Sterling, these kids come from the era where Obama was their first president. Just whatever happens from that, and then the fact that me and you are entrepreneurial, these kids are superheroes to me.
Yeah.
You know, my first president was Ronald Reagan. I never, you know, there was a time you can remember when we said, I don't know if there will be a black president. I don't know if there will be. These kids don't even think like that. That's not even part of their lexicon. So more than anything, Sterling, what people will find from me is that they're going to see books coming out. I know you have a book, man. I'm going to get that. Books coming out and other great things. But just be prepared to watch Rhett be a complete and total artist that had to start out as a businessman.
Awesome. Well, once again, thank you for your time, sharing your story, and your passion and the why behind why you do what you do. So thank you again. And to our guests, be sure to tune in next week as we interview another successful minority entrepreneur here in the DMV area. As always, I'll leave you one final quote to remember. In today's competitive business landscape, your business must embrace bold and innovative strategies to sustain profitability and stay in the black.